On a rainy night in Queens, my grandson collapsed into my arms, soaking wet, pressing a tiny drive into my hands and whispering, "Grandpa, Mom said only you can fix this." Seconds later, his father appeared at my door, reaching for the boy. I did not move aside. I did not raise my voice. I just looked at him the way I used to look at men who lied to me for a living. He left. Then I opened that drive, and I wished I hadn't. Welcome to Wise Revenge, and if you have stayed this far, that means something to me. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Your city, your state, your country. I read every single one. A note: this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but everything this story is trying to say to you is worth hearing. The rain came down the way it only does in Queens in July. Not in sheets, but in walls, solid and warm and relentless, the kind that turns the gutters into rivers and makes the whole neighborhood smell like hot asphalt and wet oak. I had the kitchen window cracked 2 inches, the way Carol always liked it, even though Carol had been gone 8 years, and there was no one left to ask whether the draft was too much. My name is Frank Gaines. I am 60 years old. I spent 25 years as a detective with the New York Police Department, the last 11 of them with the Queens Major Crimes Unit before a torn rotator cuff and a mandatory retirement package convinced me that I had done enough. I live alone in the house on Elm Street that Carol and I bought in 1991 for $112,000. It is worth considerably more than that now, which is the kind of thing people mention at dinner parties I do not attend. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea I had not touched, and a photograph I had touched too many times. Carol, at 34, standing in the backyard, in a yellow dress, squinting into the sun and laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. I had been trying to remember it for 8 years. I had not gotten any closer. Ranger was lying across my feet the way he always did in the evening. A 70-pound shepherd mix who had decided 3 years ago that my boots were the most comfortable place in the house to sleep. He was not sleeping now. He had lifted his head 12 minutes ago, fixed his eyes on the front hallway, and had not moved since. No growl, no whine. Just that low, locked attention that I had learned in 15 years of living with working dogs meant something had shifted in the world outside before any human instrument could measure it. I had been a detective long enough to know that the body keeps score when the mind is not paying attention. My shoulders were tight. My jaw was set. I had not decided to do either of those things. The phone on the table rang at 9:17. Sarah's name on the screen. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart." The voice that came back was hers, but wrong. Clipped. Thin at the edges the way a wire gets when too much current passes through it. "Dad." A pause that lasted 1 beat too long. "I'm sorry to call so late." "You never have to apologize for calling me," I said. "What's going on?" Another pause. Longer this time. I heard her breathing, shallow and deliberate, the kind of breathing a person does when they are working very hard to sound like they are not working at all. "Mark needs to move some money around for the garage. Cash flow thing. He was wondering if you could help out with a short-term loan. $50,000. $50,000, said in one breath, fast like a word she had been coached to say and needed to get out before she lost her nerve. "Sarah," I kept my voice level. "Is everything okay at home?" "Of course." Too fast. "Everything's fine, Dad. It's just a business thing." I had sat across from liars for 25 years. Paid liars, scared liars, liars who believed their own stories so completely they had rewritten their own memories to match. My daughter was none of those things. She was a woman who loved me enough to protect me from whatever was happening in that apartment, and she was not very good at it, and it broke something in my chest to hear her try. "Put Mark on?" I said quietly, a sound on the other end. Not her voice. A sound like cloth moving or a hand covering a receiver, and then beneath it, a voice I recognized as Mark's. Even though I could not make out the words, low and close, and carrying a heat that had nothing to do with the July night outside. Then the call dropped. I sat with the dead phone in my hand for 11 seconds. I counted them. It was a habit from the job giving myself a measured pause before I acted, because the decisions made in the first 10 seconds after a shock were almost always the wrong ones. On the 12th second, Ranger stood up. All the way up, not the lazy stretch of a dog changing positions, but straight to his feet, with his ears forward and his weight shifted toward the front of the house. A sound was building in his chest that he had not yet decided to release. I was already standing when the pounding started at the front door. Not a knock. A fist open and desperate hitting wood hard enough that I could feel the percussion of it through the kitchen floorboards. And under it, between the blows, a voice so thin with effort that I almost did not recognize it as a child's. "Grandpa." A breath. "Grandpa, please." I crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and had the front door open before the next blow landed. Leo fell into me. He was soaked through to the skin, his shirt plastered to his ribs, his sneakers making a sound like wrung cloth when he moved. There was a red scrape across his left knee, and his lips had gone a pale, bruised color from the cold of the rain, and his eyes, when they found mine, were wide and dark and burning with something that was not quite fear and not quite relief, but lived in the terrible space between them. His right hand was clenched tight against his chest knuckles, white, holding something small and rectangular with the grip of a child who had been told in no uncertain terms that he must not let go of it no matter what happened to him on the way. I pulled him inside. I wrapped both arms around him and pulled him in off the porch and held him against my chest and felt his whole body shaking. Not the soft shiver of a cold child, but the deep, uncontrollable trembling of one who has been running hard and holding himself together through willpower alone, and has just now allowed himself to stop. "I've got you," I said into his wet hair. "Grandpa's got you. You're safe." The shaking did not stop. But his grip on the small rectangle in his hand did not loosen either. Outside, through the open door, the rain came down in walls, and somewhere in the dark, beyond my front gate, I heard the sound of a car door. I pulled Leo all the way into the kitchen and kicked the front door shut behind me, not slamming it, just closing it with my foot, while both arms stayed around the boy. He was shaking so hard I could feel his teeth clicking together against my shoulder. I walked him to the kitchen table and sat him down in Carol's old chair, the one with the worn armrest on the left side, and I crouched in front of him so my eyes were level with his. "Leo." I kept my voice the way I used to keep it in interview rooms, low and steady, a voice that said nothing in this world could surprise me. "Look at me." He looked at me. His eyes were dark brown, same as Sarah's, and they were doing the thing Sarah's eyes did when she was trying not to fall apart, moving slightly, focusing and refocusing, looking for something solid to anchor to. "You're inside now," I said. "The door is closed. You're with me. Can you tell me what happened?" His mouth opened, closed. Then his jaw set. The way a child's jaw sets when they have decided to be brave, even though every nerve in their body is screaming at them to do something else. "Mom said to run," he said. His voice was rougher than it should have been, scraped raw. "She said if it ever got really bad, really, really bad, I had to run to you. She made me practice the route, Grandpa, 3 times. She timed me. Something moved through my chest that I did not have a name for. I had spent 25 years learning to keep my face still while the world fell apart in front of me, and I kept it still now. But it cost me more than it ever had in any interrogation room. "She packed this a long time ago," Leo said. He opened his right hand. The USB drive was small and black, no bigger than my thumb, wrapped in a single layer of plastic sandwich wrap that had kept it dry through the run. Sarah had wrapped it. Sarah had planned for the rain. "She said, 'Give it only to you,'" Leo said. "She said you would know what to do with it." I took it from him carefully, the way you take something from a child who has carried it a great distance and understood, without being told, that it mattered. I closed my fingers around it and held it for a moment without looking at it, because looking at it would have to wait. And right now, what mattered was the 8-year-old sitting in Carol's chair with rain still dripping from his hair onto the kitchen floor. I stood up and went to the linen closet in the hallway and came back with the heaviest blanket I owned, a wool one Carol had bought at a market in Vermont the winter before she got sick. I draped it over Leo's shoulders and tucked it around him, and Ranger, who had followed us into the kitchen without making a sound, pressed his entire head into Leo's lap and stayed there. Leo looked down at the dog. His hand came out from under the blanket and rested on Ranger's ears, and some of the shaking began to slow. I was filling a mug with hot water from the kettle when I heard the footsteps on the porch. Heavy, fast. A man not bothering to be quiet because he did not think he needed to be. Then the knock. 3 hard raps, the kind that were not really asking. Leo's hand tightened in Ranger's fur. Ranger did not move his head from the boy's lap, but a sound started in his chest, low and continuous, like a motor that had been switched on and was now waiting for instruction. I set the mug down. I put the USB drive in my shirt pocket against my chest. I walked to the front door and opened it. Mark Miller was 32 years old and built like a man who had been athletic in his early 20s and had since converted that frame into something softer without losing the size. He was standing on my porch with his shirt soaked through and his chest heaving, and his face was wearing an expression I recognized immediately, because I had seen it 10,000 times across 10,000 interview tables. It was the expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say on the drive over and was now recalculating because the situation had not arranged itself the way he had planned. His eyes went to my shirt pocket before they went to my face. 1 second, maybe less. But I had spent a career reading the things people looked at when they thought no one was watching, and what Mark Miller looked at in the first half second of seeing me told me everything about what was in that USB drive before I had opened it. "Hey, Frank." He brought up the smile. It was a good smile, practiced, the kind that had probably worked on Sarah when they were younger, and the world was simpler. "Sorry about this. Leo gets scared during storms, you know how he is. I figured he'd head over here." He spread his hands, easy and open. "I'll just take him home, get him dried off. Sorry he woke you up." "He didn't wake me up," I said. Right. The smile held. "Still, it's late. Kid needs to be in bed." I leaned against the doorframe. I did not move aside. "Where's Sarah?" Something shifted behind his eyes, just a flicker, fast and controlled. "She's home. She's fine. We had a little argument, nothing serious. Leo just got scared and ran. You know how kids are." "I know how kids are," I said. I looked at him the way I used to look at men who sat across from me in rooms with no windows and told me stories that were almost true. I looked at him slowly, without hurry, starting at his face and moving down the way a man looks at something he is cataloging rather than seeing. I let my eyes rest on his right forearm, where the skin above his wrist had gone a deep, mottled red that was already beginning to purple at the edges. Not a bruise from a fall. The shape was wrong for that. The shape was right for a hand that had grabbed something or someone and been grabbed back hard enough to leave a mark on the grabber. He pulled his sleeve down. Too late. And he knew I had seen it. And he knew that I knew what it meant. The silence between us lasted 4 full seconds. I counted them the same way I had counted the seconds after Sarah's call dropped, giving the moment its proper weight, not filling it with words, because words would have let him off the hook, and I had no intention of doing that. "Leo stays here tonight," I said. Mark's jaw worked. The smile was gone now, replaced by something that wanted to be anger, but kept running into something else. Something that lived behind his sternum and recognized on a level below conscious thought that he was standing on a porch in the rain in front of a man who had put people in handcuffs for a living and who was not afraid of him in any way that mattered. "Frank, come on." His voice dropped, took on a softer edge, almost reasonable. "He's my son. You can't just, he's my grandson," I said, "and he stays here tonight." I held his gaze for 2 more seconds. Then I stepped back and closed the door. I stood in the hallway with my hand flat against the wood and listened to him stand on the porch. He stood there for a long time. Then I heard his footsteps go back down the steps, slow and deliberate, the footsteps of a man making a decision about what to do next. I walked back to the kitchen. Leo was still in Carol's chair, Ranger's head still in his lap, the wool blanket pulled tight around his shoulders. He looked up at me with those dark eyes that were so much his mother's, it made my throat close. "Is he gone?" Leo asked. "He's gone," I said. Leo let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than his lungs. Then he said in a voice so quiet, I had to lean in to hear it over the rain, "Grandpa Mom said to tell you the password is the same one you taught her. She said you'd remember." I stood very still in the middle of my kitchen, with Carol's blanket on my grandson's shoulders and a USB drive over my heart, and a password I had not thought about in years rising up through my memory, like something that had been waiting a long time to be needed. The password was Carol's birthday written backwards. Month, day, year, no spaces, all numbers, the way I had taught Sarah when she was 14 years old. And I had sat her down at the kitchen table and explained that in a world where information could be taken from you, the best protection was something no one else would think to look for in something everyone already knew. Carol had laughed at me from the doorway that evening, called me paranoid, and then kissed the top of my head and said she was glad our daughter had a father who thought about these things. Sarah had remembered. After 22 years, she had remembered, and she had used it. And the fact that she had used it meant she had planned for this moment with the kind of careful, patient love that did not announce itself and did not ask to be noticed. I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a long moment, with that understanding settling into me like cold water finding its level. Then I looked at Leo. He had stopped shaking. Ranger's weight was still across his lap, and the wool blanket had slipped off one shoulder, and his eyelids were doing the slow, losing battle of a child who has burned through every reserve he had and has nothing left to run on. He was fighting sleep the way 8-year-olds fight sleep, with pure, stubborn will and no strategy. "Leo," I sat down across from him, "I need you to tell me one more thing before you rest. Can you do that?" He nodded, jaw tight with the effort of staying awake. "Did your mom tell you anything else about the drive, about what's on it? Anything she said I should know?" He thought about it with the seriousness that children apply to things they understand are important. "She said it has everything," he said finally. "She said she's been saving it for a long time. She said when the time was right, you'd know what to do with everything inside." He paused. She also said to tell you she's sorry she waited so long. The back of my throat closed. I breathed through it. She said one more thing, Leo continued, and his voice had gone quieter now, slower sleep pulling at the edges of every word. She said she didn't tell you because she was scared of what you'd do, not scared of you. He was very careful about that distinction, careful the way Sarah must have been careful when she explained it to him. Scared for you. She said you'd do something that would get you in trouble, and she couldn't let that happen. I had to look away from him then. I looked at the window at the rain still running down the glass in long, wavering lines, and I pressed my back teeth together, and I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth the way the department psychologist had taught me 30 years ago for moments when the truth arrived in a shape too large to absorb all at once. My daughter had been protecting me. While she was the one who needed protecting, she had been spending her energy making sure I would not do something that would land me in a cell or a courtroom. She had not been waiting passively. She had been building, collecting, preparing. She had been running her own investigation inside her own home with the methodical patience of someone who understood that the only exit worth taking was one that did not leave any doors open behind her. She had learned that from somewhere. I thought about Carol in the doorway calling me paranoid, and I thought about Sarah at 14, sitting at this same table learning that information carefully kept was information that could protect you when nothing else could. Okay, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. Okay, buddy, you did everything right. Your mom is going to be so proud of you. Leo's eyes were at half-mast. Is she going to be okay? Yes, I said. Not because I knew it yet. Because I was going to make it true and there was no meaningful difference between those two things, not at 11 o'clock on a Friday night with a USB drive in my shirt pocket and 25 years of knowing how to dismantle a situation piece by careful piece. I carried him to the guest room, which still had the twin bed Sarah had slept in as a teenager, the quilt Carol had made the winter she was pregnant. Leo did not fully wake when I set him down. He turned onto his side and Ranger jumped up without being invited and curled at the foot of the bed. And I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at both of them in the dark. Then I went to my office. It was a small room at the back of the house, the room I had used for years to review case files when the work followed me home, which it always did. There was a desk, a lamp, a computer that was 3 years old and ran slowly and suited me fine. On the wall above the desk, there was a photograph of my unit from 1987, 12 men and women standing in front of the 109th precinct, in their plain clothes squinting into a winter sun. I was third from the left, 32 years old with a mustache I had kept, until Carol told me it made me look like a television villain. I sat down. I took the USB drive from my shirt pocket and held it in the light. It was a standard drive, 16 gigabytes, the kind sold at any pharmacy or office supply store in the city for under $15. The plastic wrap Sarah had put around it had kept it completely dry. She had thought of that too, the possibility that Leo would have to run through rain. I unwrapped it carefully and set the plastic wrap on the desk corner where I would not lose it. Then I plugged the drive into the computer and waited for the machine to read it. A password prompt appeared. I typed Carol's birthday backwards. Month, day, year, no spaces. The drive opened. There were 3 folders. No names on any of them, just numbers. 1, 2, 3 in that order, which told me Sarah had organized them deliberately, had thought about the sequence in which I should find things, had considered what it would feel like to be me sitting in this chair opening this drive, and had tried even now to make it easier. I put my hand flat on the desk. I breathed in once, slowly. Ranger made a sound from the other room, a soft, settling sound, the sound of a dog who has decided the night is under control. I moved my cursor to folder 1 and clicked. The first image filled the screen, and I sat very still, and the rain kept coming down outside, and the house on Elm Street held its breath around me. What I am about to tell you, I did not witness myself. I learned it afterward, the way detectives learn most things from records, from testimony, from people who were in that room. But it matters that you know it happened, so I will tell it to you now. 12 miles away and a world apart, Mark Miller was pouring himself a second glass of Malbec and laughing. The apartment was on the 14th floor of a building on East 73rd Street, the kind of address that announced itself without trying floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city lights furniture that had been chosen by someone who understood the difference between expensive and tasteful and had deliberately chosen expensive. Veronica Vance had lived here for 11 years. She had bought the unit outright. She did not discuss where the money came from, and the people in her life had learned not to ask. She was sitting on the cream sofa with her legs crossed and a glass of wine she had barely touched, watching Mark, the way a woman watches something she has already decided about. "You should have seen his face," Mark said, dropping into the armchair across from her, wine sloshing to the rim. Stood there in the doorway like he was going to say something. Didn't say a word. Just looked at me. He shook his head, grinning. "Old man thinks that silence routine still works. Does it?" Veronica asked. "On me?" Mark laughed. "Come on, he's 60 years old and he lives alone with a dog. What's he going to do?" Veronica took a small sip of her wine and said nothing. "Sarah will handle him," Mark continued. "She always does. By tomorrow morning she'll have called him, explained the whole thing away, told him Leo had a nightmare or something. She's been covering for me for 2 years. She's not going to stop now." He leaned back, spreading his arms across the chair. "And even if the old man wants to make noise, there's nothing on that drive he can actually use. It's password protected. Leo probably dropped it in a puddle." Veronica set her glass down on the coffee table. She did not make a sound doing it. She had a way of moving through rooms that left no trace, no noise, no disturbance, the way certain things moved through water. "Frank Gaines," she said. "Tell me again what he did before he retired." Mark waved a hand. "Detective. Queens. 20-something years. Major crimes," Veronica said. "He ran the financial fraud division for 6 years before his last posting. He closed the Delancey case in 2009, the Marsh Brothers operation in 2014. She paused. "I looked him up when you first told me about Sarah's father." Mark stared at her. "When was that?" 3 years ago." She reached for her glass again, turned it slowly between her fingers. "I like to know who is adjacent to my business, Mark. It is a habit that has kept me out of a great deal of trouble." The grin on Mark's face had developed a crack in it, thin and almost invisible, the kind of crack that appears in things before they break. "You're saying he's a problem." "I am saying he is a variable," Veronica said. "And I do not like variables." Mark leaned forward. "Sarah will fix it. I know her." Veronica looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, but contained elements of both. Then she smiled, small and precise. "Of course she will," she said. "You know her best." She stood smoothing her slacks and walked toward the hallway. At the entrance, she paused without turning around. "I'm going to bed. Lock up when you leave." Mark watched her go. The crack in his expression widened slightly. Then he refilled his glass and told himself it was nothing. In the bedroom, Veronica sat on the edge of the bed and picked up her phone. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a name listed only as RH, and typed a message that was 4 words long. She did not send it yet. She set the phone face down on the nightstand, lay back against the pillows, and stared at the ceiling, with her eyes open and her mind working through something she had been turning over since the moment Mark had said the words "old man" and USB drive in the same sentence. Then she picked up the phone and sent the message. "I need to talk. Tomorrow. Before I tell you what was inside that USB drive, and I promise you nothing could have prepared me for it. I need to know you are still here with me. Type Frank in the comments right now. That is all. Just Frank. So I know who is still in this with me when everything changes. A reminder this story carries some fictional threads woven through it, shaped for the telling, not the record. If that is not the kind of story for you, this is a good moment to step away. No hard feelings. I would not learn what happened across the river that night until much later when the investigation had pulled everything into the light. But I am getting ahead of myself. At midnight on Elm Street, I was still sitting at my desk with the glow of the monitor on my face and folder 1 open in front of me. The photographs were dated. Every single one of them time-stamped in the corner the way security footage is time-stamped month and day and year and hour, a record so precise and so deliberate that it stopped my breath for a full 3 seconds before my lungs remembered their job. 2 years of them, starting small, the way these things always start small, a bruise on Sarah's upper arm photographed in bathroom mirror, light, the kind of image a woman takes quickly and without looking at herself too long. Then more. Documented with the patience of someone who understood that evidence without context was just pictures, so she had written dates in a notes app and cross-referenced them with the photographs, building a timeline so careful and so complete that any prosecutor in Queens County would have wept to receive it. I looked at every image. I owed her that. I did not look away from a single one. When folder 1 was, I sat for a moment with my hands flat on the desk and breathed through the thing that was moving through my chest, something too large and too hot to name, and then I moved my cursor to folder 2. The garage records were meticulous. Sarah had photographed invoices, receipts, supplier confirmations, the paper trail of a man who had been replacing quality parts with cheap imitations and charging customers for the originals. Under New York General Business Law Section 396P, automotive repair shops are legally required to return replaced parts to customers upon request and to provide written estimates before beginning work. Mark had done neither. The supplier confirmations showed parts sourced from 3 different discount importers, none of them certified, all of them significantly below the cost of the genuine components being billed to customers. She had also photographed a handwritten ledger, the kind a man keeps when he does not trust digital records, showing a second set of numbers that matched none of the official accounts. There was also a screenshot of a text thread between Mark and a number labeled only V, discussing a shipment of unspecified items arriving the following Thursday and the need to clear space in the back office. I noted it and moved on. Folder 3 contained one file. Audio. 41 minutes and 17 seconds long. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. The first 8 minutes were ambient sound, a room, voices at a distance, the clink of glassware. Then Mark's voice came up close, the way a voice sounds when a phone is in a shirt pocket and the speaker leans forward over a table. "She's not going to say anything," Mark said. "She never does." A woman's voice, low and measured, one I did not yet recognize. "You're certain?" "I've been certain for 2 years." A pause, liquid pouring. "The old man's the only variable, and he doesn't know enough to be dangerous. He calls, she tells him everything's fine, he believes her because he wants to. That's how it works with him. He needs to think his daughter is happy." I stopped the recording. I sat with that for 10 seconds. Then I pressed play again. 23 minutes in, Mark's voice shifted. Lower, closer to the phone. When the time is right, the garage is just the beginning. The property on Elm Street is worth close to $900,000 now. He's 60, he lives alone, he's got no one checking on him regularly. There are legal mechanisms for that kind of situation. I've been looking into them. The woman's voice again, careful and precise. That is a longer conversation. I've got time, Mark said. The recording continued, but I stopped it there. I took the earbuds out and set them on the desk. Outside, the rain had slowed to something quieter, just a steady percussion on the roof patient, and without hurry. I looked at the photograph of my unit on the wall. 12 faces from 1987, all of us young enough to think the worst things we would ever see were already behind us. Then I looked at my hands on the desk, and I made a decision about what kind of night this was going to be. The rain had stopped sometime before 5. I knew because I had been awake to hear it slow and then quit the way a conversation quits when everything worth saying has been said. I had spent the hours between midnight and dawn at my desk, not reviewing the drive again, but thinking which was the part of detective work that nobody made television shows about because it looked like an old man sitting in a chair staring at nothing. I had printed everything. The photographs, the invoices, the ledger pages, the text thread. The audio file I had converted to a format I could transfer to a second drive, which I kept separate in the locked drawer of my desk, where I had once kept my service weapon. I had organized the documents the way I used to organize case files, chronological within category, each section flagged, everything numbered. By 5:30, I had a stack 4 inches thick, sitting in a manila folder on the corner of my desk, and a clarity in my head that only came from a night of no sleep and no self-deception. At 6 o'clock, I called Ray Suarez. He picked up on the third ring. Ray had been my partner for 11 years at the 109th and had the particular gift of waking fully alert, no gradual climb. Just asleep and then awake and ready, which was one of the reasons he had lasted longer in the department than almost anyone we came up with. Frank. No surprise in his voice. Just my name, which was enough. I need you, I said. Today, a pause of maybe 4 seconds, the sound of him sitting up and his feet hitting the floor. How bad? Sarah. Another pause, shorter. I'll be there at 8. That was the entire conversation. 22 words between two men who had worked enough ugly mornings together that the shorthand had become its own language. I put the phone down and looked at Ranger, who had come in from the guest room at some point in the night, and was now sitting in the kitchen doorway, watching me with the patient, evaluating attention of a dog who has decided the situation requires monitoring. She's going to be okay, I told him. He kept watching me. He had heard me say things with conviction before. At 7:15, I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the 5th ring, voice thick with sleep, and something else, the particular heaviness of a man who had drunk more than he intended and was now paying the first installment. Frank. Cautious. Trying to read the temperature of the call before committing to a tone. Mark. I kept my voice easy the way I used to keep it when I wanted someone to believe the room was safer than it was. Sorry to call early. I wanted to catch you before the day got busy. Yeah, no, it's fine. He was waking up now, recalibrating. Listen about last night. Leo's fine, I said. Slept through, kids and storms, you know how it is. I let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. The drive he had with him, though. I think it got wet in the rain. I tried it this morning and couldn't get it to open. Probably ruined. A silence on his end. Not the silence of a man who was relieved. The silence of a man running calculations. "That's too bad," he said, and his voice had changed in a way he could not help, something loosening in it, a tension going out. "Probably just a cheap one. Those things aren't waterproof." "Probably," I said. "Listen, the reason I'm calling. Sarah mentioned you needed some help with the garage. Cash flow situation. I'd like to talk about it, maybe work something out." I paused. "There's a diner on Junction Boulevard I like. Tony's, you know it." "I know it. Meet me there at 9. We'll have breakfast, talk numbers. Man to man, no lawyers, no drama, just family." The calculation in his silence lasted 8 seconds. I counted them. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, okay, 9 o'clock. "Good," I said. "See you then." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:30, hair pressed flat on one side, wearing the oversized t-shirt he had arrived in, which had dried overnight into wrinkles. He looked at me, and then at the coffee maker, and then back at me with the wordless morning assessment of a child taking stock of the adult in charge. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Eggs." "Yes, please." I got up and went to the refrigerator and started cracking eggs into a bowl, and Leo climbed into Carol's chair at the kitchen table and Ranger settled across his feet. And the morning moved around us in the ordinary way that mornings do, indifferent to the fact that by 9 o'clock, 2 separate things would be set in motion that could not be undone. At 7:55, Ray Suarez knocked twice and let himself in through the side door, which I had left unlocked. He was in plain clothes carrying 2 coffees from the cart on Casena Boulevard, and he looked at the 4-inch stack of documents on my kitchen table and then at me and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, both hands around his coffee cup. Then he said, "I know a lawyer. Family law domestic cases, she's worked with our unit before. Dana Kim. She's the best I've seen at this kind of thing." "Call her," I said. He nodded and reached for his phone. Outside, the morning was coming in, gray and clean through the kitchen window. The way Queens mornings come in after a hard rain, the streets washed down to something that looked briefly like it might stay that way. I got to Tony's at 8:45 and took the booth in the back corner, the one with a clear line of sight, to both the front door and the counter, a habit from the job that I had never been able to break and had stopped trying to. I ordered coffee and told the waitress I was waiting for someone. She brought the coffee without comment. I appreciated that about diners. Mark came through the door at 9:02. He was wearing a clean shirt and had combed his hair, which told me he had spent some portion of the morning trying to look like a man with nothing to hide, which was what men with things to hide always did. He spotted me in the back and crossed the room with his hands loose at his sides, the practiced ease of someone who had decided on a performance and was now delivering it. "Frank," he slid into the booth across from me. "Thanks for doing this. Coffee?" I asked. "Sure," I signaled the waitress. She poured without being asked. Mark wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at me with the expression he had probably rehearsed in the bathroom mirror that morning. Something between gratitude and contrition, carefully measured. I let him hold that expression for a while. I drank my coffee. I looked out the window at Junction Boulevard at the Saturday morning traffic, moving slow and ordinary in the wet sunlight, people with nowhere urgent to be. "So," Mark said finally, because the silence had gone on long enough that he needed to fill it. "You said you wanted to talk about the garage." "I did," I said. "I know it's a lot to ask," he started. "With everything the way things have been—" "How are things, Mark?" He stopped, recalibrated. "Better," he said. We're working through some stuff. Couples go through rough patches, you know that. Sure, I said. I looked at him the way I used to look at men who were telling me the version of the truth they had decided I deserved. Not with anger, not with accusation, just with the patient level attention of someone who has all day and knows that silence is the most efficient interview tool ever developed because people cannot stand it and will fill it with whatever they have been trying not to say. Mark filled it. Sarah and I are solid, he said. Last night was nothing. Leo overreacted. Say Leo's 8, I said. Kids that age, they pick up on tension and they blow it out of proportion. You know how it is. You said that last night, I said. About knowing how kids are. Something moved behind his eyes, fast and small. Right, he said. I just meant. My phone buzzed on the table between us. I looked at the screen. A text from Suarez, 2 words. All clear. I turned the phone face down. I picked up my coffee cup and drank what was left in it, and set it down and looked at Mark Miller across the scratched laminate table of a Queen's diner on a Saturday morning, and felt something that was not satisfaction and not relief, but lived in the quiet territory between them. I'm not going to give you the 50,000, I said. Mark's jaw tightened. Frank, I'm not going to give you anything today, I said. I don't have anything for you today. He leaned forward. The performance was slipping now, the careful ease giving way to something underneath it, something with edges. Then why did you ask me here? I needed you to be somewhere specific for about 45 minutes, I said. You've been very helpful. The color left his face in stages, starting at his temples and moving inward. He stared at me. Then he grabbed his phone from his jacket pocket and stood up so fast the coffee mug rocked on the table. I did not move. Sit down, Mark. He was already dialing. He pressed the phone to his ear, standing in the back booth of Tony's diner, with his chest heaving and his free hand gripping the back of the seat hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. No answer. He dialed again. She's not there, I said. He looked at me with something I had seen before, in rooms with no windows, the specific expression of a man who has understood all at once that the ground he was standing on was not ground at all. What did you do? I made sure my daughter and my grandson are safe, I said. That's all. He stood there for another 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked out of the diner fast, not running because running would have been an admission, but moving with the urgent, barely contained stride of a man trying to hold himself together long enough to get outside. I stayed in the booth. I signaled the waitress for a refill. She poured without comment. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Suarez this time, a longer message. Sarah and Leo secure. She cried when she got in the car. Leo asked if Ranger was okay. Dana Kim confirmed for Monday morning first thing. We're good, Frank. I read it twice. Then I put the phone in my pocket and looked out the window at Junction Boulevard at the ordinary Saturday morning, continuing on without interruption. And I thought about Sarah in the back of Suarez's car, reading the face of the city she was finally leaving. And I thought about Leo asking about the dog, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment and breathed. The waitress refilled my cup without being asked. You doing okay, hon? She said. Getting there, I said. Dana Kim was already waiting outside Queen's Family Court when I pulled up at 10:45. She was shorter than I expected, maybe 5'4", wearing a dark blazer over a gray shirt, a leather bag over one shoulder, and the particular expression of a person who has been to this building enough times that it no longer made them feel anything except focused. Ray had described her as the best he had seen at this kind of work. Looking at her standing on the courthouse steps with my 4-inch folder under her arm, already reading, I believed him. Mr. Gaines. She did not extend her hand, just looked at me directly. I've been through the first 2 sections. The timestamps on the photographs are clean. The audio file is going to be the strongest piece. She paused. Has your daughter received medical attention at any point during the past 2 years? There's a hospital visit from 14 months ago, I said. She told them she fell. Dana nodded once the nod of a person filing information, rather than reacting to it. We'll pull those records. They'll corroborate the photographs. She turned and walked toward the entrance. Come on. I have a contact in the intake office. We're going to ask for an emergency protective order under Family Court Act, Section 842. Given what's in this folder, I expect we'll have a signed order before 2 o'clock. I followed her inside. An emergency protective order, as Dana explained it to me while we waited for our intake appointment, was the first line of legal protection available to a domestic violence victim in New York State. It could be issued the same day as the application, without the respondent being present, if the court found sufficient cause to believe the petitioner faced immediate risk. Once issued, the order would prohibit Mark from coming within 1,000 feet of Sarah Leo or any location they were known to frequent, including Leo's school. Violation of the order was a criminal offense, potentially a felony if a child under 14 was involved. How long does it last? I asked. Initial EPO is temporary, usually up to 8 days, pending a full hearing. At the full hearing with this evidence, we request a final order of protection. That can run up to 3 years. She looked at me over the top of the folder. Mr. Gaines, in 22 years of doing this work, I have rarely seen documentation this thorough from a victim who had no legal training. Your daughter built this case herself. I know, I said. It matters, Dana said. Not just legally. It matters for her. She didn't wait to be rescued. She prepared the rescue herself and then waited for the right moment to execute it. I did not answer that. I looked at the wall across from us at a bulletin board covered in laminated notices about court procedures and legal aid resources, and I thought about Sarah at 30 years old, sitting in a bathroom taking photographs. She hoped she would never have to use and then filing them carefully under a password only her father would know. The intake appointment took 40 minutes. Dana presented the folder with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times and understood that courthouse clerks responded to organization and specificity rather than emotion. She flagged the time-stamped photographs, the audio file transcript she had prepared on her phone during our wait, and the hospital record I had pulled from the file Sarah had included in folder 2. At 1:15 we were called back, before a family court judge, the Honorable Carol Simmons, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the demeanor of someone who had long since run out of patience for anything that wasted her time. She read the materials in silence for 11 minutes. Dana and I sat across from her and did not speak. Then Judge Simmons took her glasses down from her head and looked at me. You're the father. Yes, Your Honor. Former law enforcement, 25 years, NYPD. She looked back at the folder. The audio recording. How was it obtained? My daughter recorded it on her own device in her own home, Dana said. New York is a one-party consent state. The recording is fully admissible. Judge Simmons nodded slowly. She picked up her pen. I'm signing the emergency protective order. 1,000 feet effective immediately, covering the petitioner, the minor child, the petitioner's father's residence on Elm Street, and the minor child's school. She looked up at Dana. Get me the full hearing request by Wednesday. Yes, Your Honor. We were back on the courthouse steps by 1:40. Dana handed me a copy of the signed order, still warm from the printer. I held it in both hands and looked at my daughter's name in the petitioner field, and Mark's name in the respondent field, and the judge's signature at the bottom, and felt the particular weight of a document that meant something real had shifted in the world. "What happens now?" I asked. "A sheriff's deputy will serve him within the next few hours," Dana said. "The moment he receives that paper, he is legally required to vacate the shared residence and stay away." She pulled her bag higher on her shoulder. "If he violates, he is arrested. No warning, no discussion." My phone buzzed. A text from Suarez. "Mark just got served. He called the apartment 4 times. No answer." Then he called me. I didn't pick up. I put the phone back in my pocket. "Thank you," I said to Dana Kim. She looked at me with that same direct, unreadable attention. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me when it's finished." She started down the steps. "I'll see you Monday with your daughter." I got home at 2:30 to find Leo at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal he had made himself and a library book he had found somewhere in the guest room, open to a page about deep-sea fish. Ranger was across his feet. The television was off. The house was quiet in the way it only gets when a child has decided, without being asked, to be careful with the space around them. "Did you eat lunch?" I asked. "Cereal," he said, without looking up from the fish. "That's breakfast food. It has vitamins," he said. I made him a sandwich and put it next to the cereal bowl without comment. He ate both without looking up from the book. I stood at the kitchen counter and watched him for a moment, this 8-year-old who had run through a July storm alone and delivered evidence that would change the course of several lives, and who was now reading about anglerfish with the focused calm of a child who had done what he needed to do and was now simply waiting for the adults to finish their part. I went to my office. The afternoon was going to be administrative, which was the least dramatic and most necessary kind of work. I had learned in 25 years that cases were won in the paperwork, not the confrontations. Confrontations were loud and memorable, and usually happened after the real work was already done. I drafted the complaint to the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles Consumer Assistance Unit first. Under New York General Business Law Section 396P, automotive repair shops are required by law to provide written estimates before beginning work, to obtain customer authorization before exceeding those estimates, and to return all replaced parts to the customer upon request. Mark had done none of these things. The invoices Sarah had photographed showed a consistent pattern over 18 months. Parts billed at genuine manufacturer prices, supplier confirmations, showing the same parts sourced from uncertified discount importers at a fraction of the cost. The difference pocketed without disclosure. I attached the relevant pages from the folder numbered and indexed. I wrote a cover letter that was 1 page long and contained no adjectives. Then I prepared a second identical package for the New York Attorney General's Consumer Frauds Bureau, which handled cases where the pattern of fraud was systematic rather than isolated. 18 months of falsified invoices across dozens of customers was systematic. I sent both submissions electronically and printed confirmation receipts, which I added to the master folder. Then I turned to the IRS package. This one required more care. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division did not respond to complaints the way consumer protection agencies did. They responded to financial documentation, specific and verifiable, the kind that showed a discrepancy between reported income and actual cash flow. Sarah's photographs of the handwritten ledger were the key. The second set of numbers showed cash receipts that did not appear anywhere in the official garage accounts. A gap that annualized represented somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000 in unreported income. The text thread between Mark and the contact labeled V referenced transfers and a Thursday shipment in language that suggested coordination of funds outside normal business channels. I also had the audio file. Veronica's voice careful and precise, discussing figures and timelines in a way that assumed shared knowledge of transactions that had no legitimate explanation. I organized the IRS package the way I used to organize evidence for federal referrals, chronological cross-referenced each exhibit, labeled with a one-sentence explanation of its relevance. It took me 2 hours. When it was done, I had something that would not need a cover letter full of allegations, because the documents made the allegations themselves. I would send it tomorrow, Sunday night, after I had read through it one more time with fresh eyes, which was a habit from the job I had never broken. Because the one time I had skipped it, I had transposed 2 dates on a federal exhibit and spent 3 days in deposition explaining the error. At 5 o'clock, I closed the folder and went back to the kitchen. Leo had migrated from the table to the floor, lying on his stomach, with the library book still open, and Ranger pressed along his left side. He had eaten the sandwich. The cereal bowl was in the sink, rinsed. He had rinsed it himself. I stood in the doorway and looked at him on my kitchen floor. This child who rinsed his own dishes in someone else's house on the worst weekend of his life. And I felt something shift in my chest that I recognized as the particular ache of loving someone whose resilience is going to cost them something later when the adrenaline is gone and the ordinary world comes back and the weight of what they carried finally lands. "Leo," I said. He looked up. "Your mom is safe. She's with people who are taking care of her. She's going to call you tonight." He held my gaze for a moment. His jaw worked once the same way Sarah's jaw worked when she was deciding whether to let something show. Then he nodded and looked back at the book. "Okay," he said. His hand found Ranger's ear without looking, fingers curling into the fur with the automatic certainty of a child who has learned exactly where comfort lives. I went to the refrigerator and started pulling things out for dinner, and the kitchen settled around us into the kind of quiet that is not empty, but full the way a room gets when the people in it have said what needs saying and are now simply together, which is sometimes the only thing left to be. The hotel was on 87th Street in Jackson Heights, 3 blocks from the elevated subway line, the kind of place that charged by the week and kept a bowl of wrapped candies at the front desk and did not ask questions. Suarez had it because it was cash-friendly and because the owner, a retired transit worker named Pete, owed him a favor from a noise complaint situation 4 years ago that had been handled quietly. The room was on the 2nd floor, facing the interior courtyard rather than the street. I knocked twice. Leo was standing next to me with his hands in his pockets, vibrating with the particular energy of a child, trying very hard to appear calm. The door opened. Sarah looked at her son for exactly 1 second before she dropped to her knees on the carpet and pulled him into her arms. And Leo, who had been so careful and so contained for the past 24 hours, made a sound I had never heard from him before. Something that started in his chest and came out as a single broken syllable that was not quite a word and buried his face in her shoulder. I stepped back into the hallway and looked at the wall and gave them the room. When I came back in, Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed with Leo in her lap, his legs too long for the position, but neither of them carrying her chin resting on top of his head. She looked up at me over him. The bruise on her left cheekbone had deepened overnight, gone from red to a purpled yellow at the edges, the color of something that had been there longer than one night suggested. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but steady the way eyes get when all the immediate crying is done, and what is left is just the person underneath it. "Hi, Dad," she said, 2 words. I had been waiting for them for longer than the past 24 hours. I pulled the chair from the small desk in the corner and sat down close enough that she could reach me if she needed to, And I looked at my daughter and I said, "Hi, sweetheart." Leo had gone still and heavy in her lap, the total body relaxation of a child who has finally arrived somewhere safe. Sarah stroked his hair with one hand and kept her eyes on me. "I know I should have told you," she said. "You don't owe me an explanation tonight. I want to give you one." Her voice was quiet, but there was something under it, something that had been waiting its own turn. "I didn't tell you because I knew what you would do, not something bad." She pressed her lips together. "Something that would have cost you. Your pension, your record, everything you built." She shook her head slightly. "I couldn't let you burn that down for me." I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees and looked at the floor for a moment. The carpet was the particular shade of beige that hotel carpets always are worn in a path between the door and the bed. "You were collecting evidence," I said. "For 6 months," she said. "I needed it to be enough. Enough that he couldn't fight, it couldn't talk his way out of it, couldn't get a lawyer to pick it apart." Her jaw tightened. "I needed it to be finished the first time, so it would stay finished." I raised my eyes to her. She was watching me with an expression I recognized, because I had worn it myself across 25 years of building cases that could not afford to fall apart. The expression of someone who understood that patience was not weakness, that waiting for the right moment was not the same as accepting the wrong situation. "You did it right," I said. Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly. More like the release of a tension that had been held so long it had started to feel like structure. "Dana Kim called me," Sarah said. "This afternoon. She explained the EPO." A pause. "She said I built the case myself." "You did?" She said it was the strongest intake file she'd seen in years. It was. Sarah looked down at Leo at his slow-breathing stillness in her lap. "He ran through the rain," she said. "I practiced the route with him 3 times, but I never actually thought—" Her voice caught once, just once, a small fracture in the steadiness. "He's 8 years old." "He knew what he was doing," I said. "He did it exactly right." She nodded, pressing her lips together again. We sat quietly for a moment, the 3 of us in the small hotel room with the subway rumbling past on the elevated line outside and the candy bowl downstairs and the ordinary world continuing on in all directions, and I thought about what it meant to love someone so much that you spent 6 months building them an exit while they were hurting you, and what it meant that she had spent those same 6 months loving me enough to keep me out of it. "What happens Monday?" she asked. "You meet with Dana in the morning. Then we build the next piece." I paused. "One thing at a time." She nodded. Then she reached across Leo's sleeping weight and put her hand over mine on the arm of the chair. Her fingers were cold from the air conditioning. I turned my hand over and held them. We stayed like that until Leo stirred and asked in a voice thick with sleep whether Ranger was okay at home by himself. "He's fine," I said. "He's got food and the television on." Leo considered this with his eyes still closed. "What channel?" "Nature documentaries," I said. "He likes the ones about birds." Leo almost smiled. Sarah did smile, small and tired and real, and it was the best thing I had seen in several days. The call came at 8:47 Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen when my phone rang, a Queens area code I did not recognize. I picked up. "Mr. Gaines." A woman's voice, steady but carrying something underneath it, the particular tension of someone managing a situation they had not expected to manage today. "This is Carmen Rivera. I'm Leo's homeroom teacher at PS 149. I need you to come to the school. Leo is safe," she added immediately, because she was a person who understood what a grandparent's heart did in the half-second before that clarification arrived. "He's with me in my classroom, but there's a situation at the front entrance I think you need to know about." I was already reaching for my keys. "I'm on my way." "What happened?" "A man has been standing outside the main gate for the past 20 minutes, she said. Leo recognized him through the window and came directly to me. He didn't go outside. He did exactly what he was supposed to do." A brief pause. "The man is still there. I've notified the front office and we have him on camera." "Don't let Leo out of your sight," I said. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Call 911 if he attempts to enter the building." I called Suarez before I reached the car. He picked up on the first ring. "I already know," he said. "Rivera called the precinct after she called you. I've got 2 units rolling. Frank, if it's Mark and he's within the EPO boundary, this is aggravated criminal contempt. Felony. He doesn't get a warning." "I know what it is," I said. "Stay back when you get there. Let my people handle the approach. You're not a cop anymore." I did not answer that. I got in the car. PS 149 on Casena Boulevard was a 3-story brick building with a chain-link fence running the perimeter of the schoolyard, the kind of New York City public school that had been standing since before most of the parents of its current students were born. I pulled up on the opposite side of the street and stopped. Mark was at the gate. He was standing on the public sidewalk technically, but the gate itself was the boundary line, and the EPO specified 1,000 feet from Leo's school, and the gate of PS 149 was not 1,000 feet from anything except the front door. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking through the chain link into the schoolyard with the particular posture of a man who had told himself he was just standing on a public sidewalk and had almost convinced himself that was a meaningful distinction. 2 NYPD cruisers came around the corner from Casena before I had been parked 30 seconds. I watched from across the street. The officers approached Mark from 2 directions, which was standard, one from each side, so there was no angle of retreat that didn't bring him toward a uniform. Mark turned when he heard them and held up both hands immediately, the gesture of a man who had grown up around enough authority to know that sudden movements were inadvisable, which was almost funny given the circumstances. One officer spoke to him. Mark shook his head. The officer spoke again, and I could see from across the street the moment Mark understood that this was not a conversation, because his shoulders dropped in a specific way. The way shoulders drop when the last available argument runs out and the body concedes what the mind is still refusing to accept. They cuffed him with his hands in front, which was a courtesy, and walked him to the first cruiser. He looked across the street once, just before they put him in the back seat. He found my car immediately, which told me he had known I was there the whole time. We looked at each other through 2 panes of glass and 30 feet of Tuesday morning air, and I felt nothing that resembled satisfaction, which surprised me less than it once would have. I waited until the cruiser pulled away. Then I crossed the street and went inside. Carmen Rivera was 30-something, with the careful, unhurried manner of a teacher who had been doing this long enough to know that the way you spoke to a child in a difficult moment stayed with them longer than almost anything else. She met me in the hallway outside her classroom and spoke quietly. "Leo handled it perfectly," she said. "He saw him through the window, came straight to my desk and said, 'I need you to call my grandfather and the police.' In that order." She paused. "He said his mother had told him exactly what to do." "She did," I said. Rivera nodded. "He's been reading at my desk since. He asked if he could borrow a book about marine biology." She looked at me with an expression that was not quite a question. "He's going to be okay." "Yes," I said. "He is." She opened the classroom door. Leo was at the teacher's desk, with a hardcover book open in front of him, a mug of hot chocolate beside it, that Rivera had clearly made for him. He looked up when I came in, and his face did the thing it had done when he first fell through my front door Friday night. That rapid assessment checking that the person arriving was the person expected. Then he closed the book and stood up. I crossed the room and put my hand on the back of his head, and he pressed his forehead against my chest and stood there, just stood there, and I could feel him breathing slow and deliberate, the breathing of a child who has learned in 72 hours that he is more capable than he knew and is still deciding how to carry that. My phone buzzed. Suarez. Mark in custody. Aggravated criminal contempt. Class E felony, NY Penal Law 215.52. Bail set at $25,000. He'll be out by end of day, but the felony charge sticks. Also Frank? He had his phone when they brought him in. 17 missed calls from a number registered to Veronica Vance. She's been trying to reach him since this morning. I read it twice. Then I put the phone away and looked at the top of Leo's head. Ready to go, I said. Yes, he said. Can we get Ranger? Already planned on it, I said. Suarez called me at 2:15 that afternoon. I was in the backyard with Leo and Ranger Leo throwing a tennis ball that Ranger retrieved with the focused enthusiasm of a dog who considered this his primary professional obligation. The afternoon had gone soft and warm after the morning's tension. The kind of July afternoon that arrives without apology and asks nothing of you. And I had let Leo have it without interruption because he had earned it, and because 8-year-old boys who have carried the weight he had carried for 72 hours needed to throw tennis balls at dogs in backyards without anyone explaining anything to them. I stepped to the edge of the yard to take the call. Mark posted bail at 1:40, Suarez said. He's out. But there's something else. His phone was returned to him when he was processed out, and the first thing he did in the parking lot was call Veronica Vance. A pause. She didn't pick up. She's been calling him all morning, and now she won't pick up, I said. Said that's correct. Another pause, the kind Suarez used when he was deciding how much to say and in what order. Frank, her lawyer, contacted the Queens County DA's office this morning, before Mark was even arrested. They're calling it a proffer inquiry, which means they want to discuss what she might be able to offer in exchange for consideration on potential charges. I watched Ranger drop the tennis ball at Leo's feet and look up at him with absolute conviction that the game was not finished. She's building a wall between herself and Mark, I said. She's been building it since before we knew there was a fire, Suarez said. The lawyer she retained specializes in white-collar cooperation agreements. He's done 3 federal cases in the past 2 years. She didn't hire him this morning. That kind of lawyer takes preparation. I thought about the text message she had sent the night this started, 4 words, I need to talk. Tomorrow. Sent at 1 in the morning while Mark was still in her apartment, telling himself everything was under control. She knew, I said. The moment Mark mentioned your name, she started calculating, Suarez said. She just needed to know which way the current was running before she committed to a direction. Leo threw the ball again. Ranger was gone and back in 11 seconds. What does the proffer mean practically? I asked. It means she's offering information in exchange for the DA's office considering a reduced charge or immunity on specific counts. It's not a deal yet. It's a conversation about a deal. But the fact that her lawyer initiated contact before Mark was even arrested this morning tells you she's not doing this reactively. She's been ready. What information does she have? That's what the DA's office wants to find out, Suarez said. My contact there said the lawyer mentioned financial records, transaction logs, and communications between Veronica and Mark going back 18 months. which lines up with what's in your USB. I turned that over for a moment. Veronica providing the same financial records that Sarah had already photographed, and I had already submitted to the IRS and the DMV. Two independent streams of evidence pointing at the same set of transactions, from two different sources, neither of which could be explained away as fabricated or misunderstood. She doesn't know about the IRS submission, I said. No, Suarez said. She thinks she's the primary source. She thinks her cooperation is what cracks it open. And Mark. Mark called her 7 more times after he got his phone back, Suarez said. She didn't answer any of them. On the 8th call, he left a voicemail. I won't repeat what he said, but the general sentiment was that he felt their arrangement had been mischaracterized. I had heard that sound before in rooms with no windows from men who had just understood that the person they were counting on had already made other arrangements. I knew without being told that Mark was making that sound somewhere across the city right now. I had heard it in interview rooms. It always sounded the same, the sound a man made when he understood for the first time that the alliance he had been counting on was a transaction and the other party had simply found a better deal. He's going to want to talk, I said. He already does, Suarez said. His public defender called the DA this afternoon. Mark wants to make his own proffer. The problem is Veronica's lawyer got there first, which means Mark is now in the position of offering information that the DA's office may already be receiving from a more cooperative source. A brief pause. He waited too long. Leo had stopped throwing the ball. He was sitting cross-legged on the grass with Ranger in his lap, an impractical arrangement given the dog's size, but Ranger had committed to it fully, his entire back half hanging off Leo's knees, and Leo was laughing, the genuine, unguarded laugh of a child who has temporarily forgotten everything except the dog. I watched them for a moment. Ray, I said. The auction. Veronica's auction. Do we know when? This Saturday, Suarez said. Upper East Side. Invitation only 40 guests. Preview starts at 7. My contact at the AG's office already flagged it. They've been watching Vance Properties for 8 months on an unrelated matter. Your submission gave them the connection to Miller Auto they needed. His voice shifted slightly, took on the tone he used when he was about to say something he wanted me to hear carefully. Frank, they're going to move on it. With or without us. But if you want to be part of building the warrant application, I need your original documentation by Thursday morning. You'll have it Wednesday night, I said. I ended the call and stood in the backyard with the afternoon light coming through the oak tree at the back fence. The same oak tree that had been there when Carol and I bought the house. The same one Sarah used to climb until she was 11, and Carol made her stop. I walked back to where Leo was sitting with Ranger and lowered myself to the grass beside them. My knees were not what they had been at 40, and I made a sound getting down that I would not describe, and Leo looked at me sideways with an expression that was trying hard not to be amused. Don't, I said. He pressed his lips together. Ranger shifted his weight and stepped directly on my leg in the process of repositioning, and Leo gave up on not being amused and laughed again, and I sat there on the grass in the backyard on Elm Street with my grandson and my dog in the July afternoon and let the sound of it settle around me like something I intended to remember. We are at the moment everything converges. Every document, every phone call, every decision made in the dark, it all comes to one night, one room, one address on the Upper East Side. Before I take you there, comment justice below, one word. Let me see how many of you have stayed this far. A note before we continue: certain scenes and details ahead have been crafted for this story. The truth it carries is real, the shape it wears is mine to tell. I did not go to the Upper East Side that Saturday night. Suarez had offered in the careful way. He offered things he expected me to decline to get me a position somewhere near the perimeter where I could watch the approach without being in the way. I told him no. I had spent 25 years arriving at the end of other people's bad decisions, and I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And besides, the work that mattered had already been done in a manila folder on a kitchen table on Elm Street. What happened at Veronica Vance's building on East 73rd Street was the consequence of that work, and consequences did not require an audience. Instead, I made dinner. Sarah and Leo had been back at the house on Elm Street for 2 days. The guest room converted into something closer to a real bedroom. Leo's library books stacked on the nightstand. Sarah's coffee cup in the spot on the counter where Carol's had always been. The house was adjusting to them the way old houses adjust to people, slowly and without announcement, the floorboards learning new footstep patterns, the rooms filling with a warmth that had been absent long enough that I had stopped noticing the absence until it came back. I made pasta the way Carol used to make it, garlic and olive oil and whatever vegetables were in the refrigerator, simple enough that Leo would eat it without negotiation. We sat at the kitchen table, the three of us, and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of it. Leo had opinions about deep-sea fish that he was willing to share at length. Sarah had started a list of things she wanted to do when the school year began, the practical, forward-looking list of a woman who had spent 2 years unable to make plans and was now making them with the focus of someone catching up on lost time. I watched them and ate my pasta and did not check my phone. At 9:47 it buzzed on the counter. Suarez. 2 words. We're in. I set the phone face down and finished my dinner. What I learned afterward from Suarez and from the case documents that came later was this. The auction had begun at 7 with champagne and soft lighting, and 40 guests who believed they were purchasing authenticated pieces from a private European collection. Veronica had moved through the room in a black dress and the practiced composure of a woman who had done this before and intended to do it again. Mark had stationed himself near the back, because Mark always stationed himself near the back, near exits, near options. The warrant team had entered at 9:43. Not loudly, which was deliberate. NYPD art crime team and 2 investigators from the New York Attorney General's office, 4 people total, entering through the service entrance with a search warrant signed the previous afternoon by a Manhattan Supreme Court judge under New York Arts and Cultural Affairs Law Section 13.01 and federal wire fraud statutes under 18 United States Code, Section 1343. The quiet entry was strategic. A loud entry gave people time to move things. A quiet entry gave you the room the way it was. The lead investigator had approached Veronica directly, badge in hand, warrant extended. By the account I received, she had read it completely before she said a word, which was the behavior of a person who had imagined this moment and prepared for it. Then she had set the warrant down on the table beside her and said in a voice that carried no particular emotion that she would like to call her attorney. She was permitted to do so. Mark had moved toward the service entrance at the same moment the warrant team came through the front. He had not been running technically. He had been walking quickly in the direction of a door that opened onto a service corridor that led to a freight elevator that would have taken him to the building's basement parking structure. 2 investigators from the AG's office were already in the service corridor. He walked directly into them. By the account Suarez gave me, Mark had said nothing when they identified themselves. He had stood in the service corridor of Veronica Vance's building, with 2 federal investigators in front of him and a closed door behind him, and something in him had simply gone out, the way a light goes out, not gradually, but all at once. And he had put his hands up without being asked. Veronica had not looked at him when they brought him back through the main room. He had looked at her. Suarez told me that specifically because Suarez knew I would want to know. Mark had looked at Veronica across the room with the particular expression of a man who had believed until approximately 9:43 that evening that they were in this together, and Veronica had kept her eyes on her attorney and had not looked back. My phone buzzed again at 10:12. Suarez, both in custody. Vance cooperative. Miller not. Full debrief tomorrow. Go to sleep, Frank. I read it at the kitchen table. Sarah was washing dishes at the sink, her back to me. Leo had fallen asleep on the couch with Ranger across his feet, the television on low, a nature documentary about the ocean playing to no one. I looked at the photograph of Carol on the shelf above the stove. I did not say anything to it. I had been saying things to it for 8 years, and I was tired of the sound of my own voice in an empty room. Instead, I just looked at her for a moment, at the yellow dress and the summer light, and the laugh I could no longer remember the cause of, and I felt something settle in my chest that was not happiness and not relief, but was quieter than either of those things, and had been a long time coming. Then Sarah turned from the sink and said, "Dad, go to bed." "In a minute," I said. "Now," she said. "I've got the dishes." I looked at my daughter standing at Carol's sink in Carol's kitchen, and I pushed back my chair and stood up, and I said, "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Dad," she said. Suarez called on a Tuesday morning 10 days after the arrest, while I was fixing the back gate latch that had been sticking since April, and that I had been meaning to get to since April, and that kept not getting done, because there had always been something more urgent than a gate latch until now, when there wasn't. "IRS moved this morning," he said. I set down the screwdriver. "Webb!" Thomas Webb, Criminal Investigation Division, out of the Manhattan field office. He showed up at Veronica's attorney's office at 9 with a federal asset freeze order and 4 people from his team. A pause. "Frank, they froze everything. The business accounts for Vance Properties, her personal accounts, the checking, the savings, a brokerage account she apparently didn't think anyone knew about, and the Upper East Side unit." I picked up the screwdriver again and turned it in my hand without using it. "The cooperation agreement with the state DA doesn't touch the federal case," Suarez said. "That's the thing she didn't account for. She negotiated with the Queens County DA's office, which handles state charges. Wire fraud and tax evasion are federal. The IRS doesn't care what deal she made downtown. They answer to a different courthouse entirely." This was what I had known when I sent the IRS package on that Sunday night, the package I had read through twice with fresh eyes before I sealed it. The one that included the transaction logs Sarah had photographed, the unreported cash receipts, the offshore routing that appeared in 2 of the emails between Mark and the contact labeled V. 2 parallel investigations, 2 separate jurisdictions, neither of which could be resolved by a single agreement with a single prosecutor's office. Veronica had been playing chess. She simply hadn't known there were 2 boards. "How did she take it?" I asked. "Her attorney released a statement," Suarez said. 3 sentences, standard language, nothing that told you anything. He paused. "Webb told my contact that when he read her the federal asset freeze order in her attorney's office, she listened to the entire document without interrupting, asked one question about the timeline for contesting the freeze, received the answer, and thanked him for his time." I thought about that for a moment. The particular discipline of a person who had prepared for many outcomes and was now executing the response she had planned for this one. "And Mark," I said. "Mark's situation is different," Suarez said. "He's been in Rikers since the arrest. His public defender filed a motion to have the EPO violation charge reduced, which was denied. The felony sticks." A brief pause. "He sent a letter, Frank, through his public defender, addressed to you." I walked to the end of the yard and leaned against the back fence. The oak tree made a shadow across the grass that moved slightly in the July wind. "What does it say?" "I haven't read it. It was addressed to you. My contact just flagged that it existed." Another pause. "You don't have to respond. You don't have to read it. There's no legal obligation either direction." I looked at the gate latch I had been fixing. The screw on the left side had stripped at some point in the past year, which was why the whole mechanism was unstable. A stripped screw looked fine until you applied pressure to it, and then it gave way in a manner entirely out of proportion to the force applied, because the threads that were supposed to hold it had been compromised long before the failure became visible. "I'll read it," I said. The letter arrived through Suarez the following afternoon. 2 handwritten pages on lined paper, the kind of paper that came in pads sold at the commissary. Mark's handwriting was smaller than I would have expected, careful and controlled, the handwriting of a person who had learned early that how things looked mattered as much as what they were. He began with the garage. With the money I had given him 8 years ago, the $20,000 I had handed him, across this same kitchen table, because Sarah had asked me to, and because I had believed when I looked at him then that he was someone worth believing in. He wrote about it at length, the way people write about things they have decided are the center of the story, the fixed point around which everything else is supposed to orbit. He did not write about Sarah. Not the photographs, not the timestamps, not the 2 years of evidence she had collected alone in a bathroom with a phone and more patience than I had known she possessed. He wrote about what I owed him. I folded the letter when I reached the bottom of the first page. I did not read the second. I set it on the kitchen counter and went back outside to the gate latch. The stripped screw came out with a flathead and a moderate amount of force once I stopped trying to use the wrong tool for it. I replaced it with a new one from the box in the garage, the correct gauge this time, and tightened it until the mechanism held the way it was supposed to hold. Sarah came out at noon with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one without asking whether I wanted it, which was how Carol had always done it, and I noted this without saying so. "Suarez called me," she said. "About the IRS." "I know." She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the gate. "Is it done?" "The financial part." "The IRS moves slowly," I said. "But yes. The money she moved is frozen. The money she hid is found. What happens next is federal courts and federal timelines, and that takes as long as it takes." I paused. "But she's not spending it. Not any of it. Not while the investigation runs." Sarah nodded slowly. "Dad," she said. "Mark sent you a letter." "I know." "Did you read it?" "The first page." She looked at me, and I picked up my coffee. "He wanted to talk about the garage money." Sarah was quiet for a moment. A truck went by on Elm Street, heavy and unhurried, the sound of an ordinary Tuesday continuing without us. "He still thinks that's the point," she said. "He does," I said. She shook her head once, small and final, the gesture of someone closing a door they had been holding open for too long. We stood at the back gate in the July morning and drank our coffee and did not say anything else because there was nothing else that needed saying, and the gate held solid under my hand when I tested it. And that was enough for now. The 4 months between the arrests and the trial had passed. The way difficult waiting always passes, not quickly and not slowly, but in a series of days that were each individually manageable and collectively exhausting. Donna Kim had built the prosecution case with the same methodical patience Sarah had used to build the evidence, and by the time the trial date was set for the second Tuesday in November, the stack of documentation that would be presented in Queens County Supreme Court was thick enough that Mark's public defender had attempted a plea negotiation twice and been declined twice because Dana did not negotiate from strength when she did not have to. Sarah had gone back to work in September, teaching third grade at a school in Woodside, 12 minutes from Elm Street. Leo had started fourth grade at PS 149 and had, according to Ms. Rivera, become something of an authority on marine biology among his classmates. The house on Elm Street had rearranged itself around 3 people without my having made any conscious decision to let it, which was I had decided the best way for that kind of rearranging to happen. The night before the trial, I could not sleep. I was at the kitchen table at 11 with a cup of chamomile tea. I was not drinking when Sarah came in. She was wearing the old college sweatshirt she had retrieved from a box in the guest room closet, gray and soft with age, and her hair was down, and she looked in that light more like the person she had been before all of it than she had looked in months. She sat down across from me without asking if I wanted company. She poured herself a glass of water and wrapped both hands around it and looked at the table for a moment. "Can't sleep either," I said. "No." She looked up. "Are you nervous?" "No," I said. "Are you?" "Yes," she said. "Not about the verdict. Dana has explained the verdict to me 3 times and I understand it. I'm nervous about sitting in that room." I nodded. "Being in the same room as him," she said. "After everything. I keep thinking I'll feel something I don't want to feel. Something complicated." She pressed her lips together. "Is that strange?" "No," I said. "It would be strange if you didn't." She looked at her water glass. "Do you still love him as a son-in-law, I mean? Did you ever—" I thought about that honestly, the way she deserved me to think about it. "I loved who I thought he was," I said. "I was wrong about who that was. Those are 2 different things." She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about the garage money," she said. "You gave him that without hesitating. I asked you and you just said yes. You didn't make him fill out paperwork or sign anything. You just gave it to him." "You asked me to," I said. "I know." Her voice dropped slightly. "And he used it to build something that hurt people, including me. And I keep thinking that somehow that's—" She stopped. "Don't," I said. She looked at me. "That money was given in good faith," I said. "What he did with it is entirely his. You don't carry that." Her jaw tightened the way it did when she was deciding whether to let something through. Then she set her water glass down, and when she spoke, her voice had shifted into something older and quieter, the voice she used when she meant something too much for ordinary words. "Dad, I'm sorry I kept this from you for so long." I had not heard that particular weight in her voice since she was a child, sitting at this same table. It had been a long time since she had needed to say anything to me that cost her that much. My throat closed. "You don't need to apologize," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "I do," she said. I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table at the gray sweatshirt and the dark eyes that were Carol's eyes and the jaw that was my jaw and the careful, particular courage of a person who had survived something by holding herself very still for a very long time and was now finally allowing herself to move. "So you protected Leo," I said. "You protected me. You built a case that will hold. You did all of that alone and you did it right." I paused. "The only thing I'm sorry for is that you had to do any of it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then something in her face released, not collapsed. Released the way a muscle releases when it has been held in tension for so long that the release feels almost like pain. "I'm glad it was you," she said. "That Leo ran to. I'm glad it was your house." "It's your house too," I said. "It always was." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm this time, not cold, the way they had been in the hotel room, warm and steady. We sat like that for a while in the kitchen that had been Carol's kitchen and was now something else, something that belonged to all of us and to the version of this family that had come through the other side of a hard year and found itself against reasonable expectations still intact. At some point, she said she was going to try to sleep. "Me too," I said. She stood, squeezed my hand once, and went down the hallway. I sat for another few minutes alone with the chamomile tea that had gone cold and the quiet house and the photograph of Carol on the shelf above the stove. And I thought about all the things that had been broken and all the things that had held, and which list was longer, and I decided it was the second one. Then I rinsed my cup and went to bed. Queens County Supreme Court on Queens Boulevard was a building I had been in more times than I could count from both sides of the aisle, and it had never looked different to me regardless of which side I was standing on. Stone and fluorescent light, and the particular institutional smell of a place where the worst and the most ordinary moments of people's lives arrived in the same revolving door. Leo stayed outside with Suarez, which had been the plan from the beginning. Suarez had taken him to a diner on the corner and promised him pancakes, and Leo had accepted this arrangement with the equanimity of a child, who understood without needing it, explained that some rooms were not for him yet. Sarah and I sat in the second row. Donna Kim stood at the front and presented the case with the efficiency and precision I had come to expect from her, each piece of evidence introduced in the order that told the story most clearly, the timestamps on the photographs, the audio file played in full for the jury, the financial records cross-referenced with the IRS submission. She did not editorialize. She did not ask the jury to feel anything. She laid out what had happened and trusted the facts to do the work, which was the mark of a lawyer who understood that juries distrusted performances. The jury had deliberated for 4 hours. Now we were here for the sentencing. Mark was brought in wearing a gray suit that was slightly too large for him, which told me he had lost weight in the month since the arrest, and he sat at the defense table with his hands folded in front of him and looked at the middle distance the way people looked when they had decided that the best available option was stillness. He looked at me once when he first came in. I held his gaze for 2 seconds and then looked at the front of the room because there was nothing in that look worth keeping. Judge Patricia Holt entered at 9:15. She was 60-something, silver-haired, with the bearing of a person who had long since stopped finding courtrooms impressive and had begun finding them simply functional. She reviewed her notes for a moment without speaking. The room was quiet in the way that rooms full of people get quiet when everyone in them understands that the next word spoken will matter. The prosecution had introduced during the trial documentation that had not been in the original USB. The investigators from the AG's office had subpoenaed Mark's email records, and in those records they had found an exchange with a company called Clear Path Legal Services dated 14 months prior, inquiring about the process for establishing legal guardianship over an elderly parent deemed to have diminished cognitive capacity. Dana had presented this without drama. She had simply put the emails on the screen and read the relevant portions into the record, and the jury had watched Mark's public defender object and been overruled, and the emails had been entered into evidence, and no one in the room had needed anyone to explain what they meant. Mark was permitted to speak before sentencing. He stood and turned slightly, not fully toward me, but enough that the angle was deliberate, and he spoke about the garage, about the $20,000, about what it had meant to him when no one else had believed in him, when he had nothing, when I had looked at him across my kitchen table and handed him a check without conditions. He spoke for 4 minutes. He did not mention Sarah. I stood up. Dana touched my arm. I looked at her. She released my arm. I was not supposed to speak. This was not the moment in the proceeding allocated for victim impact statements, which had been delivered the previous day. But Judge Holt looked at me from the bench and did not tell me to sit down, and I understood that she was giving me 10 seconds to say what I needed to say, and I intended to use them. I gave you that money. I said because I believed you were a man worth believing in. I was wrong. But the money was never the point. My daughter is the point. What you did to her in the home she trusted you to keep safe is the point. You don't get to stand in this courtroom and ask my forgiveness by reminding me of a check I wrote 8 years ago. That check was a gift. What you owe cannot be repaid. I sat down. The room was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then Judge Holt looked at Mark over her reading glasses and said in a voice that carried no particular heat because it did not need to. Mr. Miller, the law exists to protect the people who cannot protect themselves in the moment they most need protection. You exploited that gap deliberately, systematically, and over an extended period of time. This court does not regard the circumstances that preceded your actions as mitigation. It regards them as context for a choice you made repeatedly. She looked down at her notes. On the charge of assault in the second degree, I sentence you to 7 years. On the charge of endangering the welfare of a child, 2 years concurrent. On the charge of consumer fraud, 2 years consecutive. On the charge of aggravated criminal contempt, 18 months concurrent. She set down the page. The federal wire fraud conviction will be addressed in federal court, where an additional 3 years has been recommended by the United States Attorney's Office to run consecutively to this sentence. She looked up. You will not be eligible for parole consideration on the state charges for a minimum of 5 years. Mark sat down slowly the way a person sat when their legs had made a decision their mind had not yet ratified. Sarah's hand found mine under the table. I held it. Outside in the hallway afterward, Leo came around the corner at a run with a napkin from the diner still in his hand and syrup on his jacket, and he stopped when he saw our faces and read them with the rapid, accurate assessment he had been developing since July. Is it done? He said. It's done, Sarah said. He nodded once, processing. Then he held up the napkin. Suarez let me get extra butter. Sarah laughed. It came out unsteady at first, and then steadied, and she pulled him into her side and held him there. And Suarez appeared around the corner looking like a man who had successfully completed an assignment he had not been briefed on. And I shook his hand, and the hallway of Queens County Supreme Court continued around us in its ordinary Tuesday way, indifferent and fluorescent and exactly right. They moved in on a Saturday in December, which was not a moving day by any official measure since Sarah had not had much to move. 2 suitcases, a box of Leo's books, the marine biology hardcover Ms. Rivera had let him keep at the end of the semester, and a photograph of the 3 of them, Sarah and Leo and me, taken by Suarez outside the courthouse on the day the verdict came in. Leo was holding the napkin with the syrup stain. None of us had noticed until we saw the picture. I had cleared the second bedroom properly, the one that had been a storage room since Carol got sick, and I had stopped being able to decide what to do with the things inside it. It had taken me 3 Saturdays in October and November, going through boxes that had not been opened in 8 years, making decisions I had been postponing long enough that postponing them had started to feel like a permanent condition. When I was done, the room had a real bed, a dresser curtains Sarah had chosen from a catalog, and a desk for Leo that faced the window overlooking the backyard. Leo walked through the front door that Saturday morning, looked around the living room, walked down the hallway, opened the door to his room, and stood in the doorway for a long moment without saying anything. Then he turned around and said, "The desk faces the yard." "I thought you'd like that," I said. "I can see the oak tree," he said. "In spring it gets leaves," I said. "Blocks most of the light." He considered this information with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "That's okay," he said. "I like shade." He went in and put his box of books on the desk and began arranging them by subject, which I had not asked him to do, and which he apparently felt was the correct first order of business. Ranger followed him in and stationed himself under the desk, which Leo accepted as an arrangement without discussion. Mrs. Helen Park from next door arrived at 11 with a pot of chicken soup and a pan of cornbread, both still warm, wrapped in dish towels. She did not appear to want returned. She was 65 and had lived next door for 19 years and had known Carol and had brought food every time something difficult happened on Elm Street, which was her particular and consistent form of love. She handed me the soup and looked past me into the hallway where Sarah was hanging a coat, and she said, "It's good that they're here." And I said, "Yes, it is." And she nodded and went back to her house without requiring anything further from either of us. That was Helen Park entirely. Sarah had found a school supply she liked in Woodside and was negotiating a full-time contract for January. Leo had 2 friends from PS 149 whose mothers had already called about weekend arrangements. The infrastructure of an ordinary life was assembling itself around them, with a naturalness that I watched without interfering, the way you watched something grow when you had finally stopped pulling at it to make it go faster. In the afternoon, Suarez came by with a 6-pack and sat with me on the back porch, while Sarah and Leo were inside. Leo reading Sarah on the phone with Dana Kim about the final paperwork. Suarez and I did not talk about any of it. We talked about a cold case from 2003 that had been recently reopened and a new Korean restaurant on Northern Boulevard that he claimed had the best short ribs in Queens, and which I told him I would believe when I tried them, and the afternoon went the way good afternoons go, without effort and without announcement. When he left, he shook my hand at the door and held it a moment longer than a handshake required. He did not say anything. He did not need to. That evening, I made dinner for 3, which felt different from making dinner for 1 in a way I had not anticipated and could not have described to anyone who had not experienced the same thing. The kitchen was loud with the particular noise of a child who had opinions about whether the pasta needed more salt, and a woman who was setting the table while conducting a conversation with someone on the phone about parent-teacher conferences, and Ranger was underfoot, with the focused attention of a dog who understood that dinner time was a team activity. After dinner, Leo sat at the kitchen table with his homework, and I sat across from him with the newspaper I had been meaning to read since Thursday, and Sarah washed dishes at the sink, and the house made the sounds that houses make when they are being lived in by the right number of people. At some point, Leo looked up from his homework and said, "Grandpa." "Yeah. I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" He put his pencil down. "That night, when I ran to your house." He looked at me with the direct, undeflected gaze that children used when they had decided a question was important enough to ask straight. "Were you scared?" I thought about it honestly, the way he deserved. "Yes," I said. "Of what? Of not being able to fix it," I said. "Of being too late." He nodded slowly, turning this over. "But you weren't." "No," I said. "I wasn't." He picked up his pencil. "Mom said you never were. Too late, I mean. She said you always showed up." I looked at my grandson across the kitchen table at the marine biology book on the corner of the desk, visible through the doorway at the syrup-stained napkin photograph on the refrigerator that Sarah had put there, with a magnet shaped like the Statue of Liberty that had been in a kitchen drawer since 1987. "Your mom gives me too much credit," I said. Leo considered this. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe you don't give yourself enough." He went back to his homework. Sarah turned from the sink and caught my eye and said nothing. Just looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized, because it was Carol's expression, the one that meant she had heard something and had decided the moment did not require comment, because the moment was sufficient on its own. I looked at the photograph on the shelf above the stove, I did not speak to it. I had stopped doing that. I just looked at Carol in her yellow dress in the summer light, and I thought about all the rooms this house had held over the years, all the versions of this family, and I thought that she would have liked this version, this loud and improbable and hard-won version very much. Then Leo asked if he could have more pasta. "There's some left," I said. "Can Ranger have some too?" "Absolutely not," I said. Ranger looked at me with an expression of profound betrayal. Leo laughed and Sarah laughed, and the kitchen filled with it, and the house on Elm Street held it the way it held everything, quietly and without complaint, the way a good house does. I have told you this story the only way I know how to tell anything straight, without decoration, the way it actually happened. People who hear Dad's revenge stories often expect fire and confrontation. Doors kicked in, voices raised, a father arriving like a storm. That is not what this was. What this was patience, documentation, a manila folder on a kitchen table, and 25 years of knowing that the most durable justice is the kind built carefully enough that it cannot be undone. I am not telling you I did everything right. I waited too long to ask my daughter hard questions. I mistook her silence for happiness, because it was easier than investigating the alternative. If there is one thing this cost me the truth to learn, it is this: family justice does not begin in a courtroom. It begins in a conversation you keep postponing because you are afraid of what you might hear. Do not be like me in that way. Ask the people you love how they are, and then wait long enough to hear the real answer. I believe that God puts certain moments in front of us, not to punish us, but to show us what we are still capable of becoming. That night Leo ran through the rain was one of those moments. I almost missed it. I am grateful I did not. These are the stories I carry now. The dad's revenge stories that do not end with violence, but with a signed court order and a child asking for more pasta. The family justice that looks like a daughter finally sleeping without listening for footsteps in the hallway. If this story reached something in, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a word in the comments. It costs nothing and means more than you know. And if you have not yet considered joining this channel, because there are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for staying until the end. It means everything. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If any part of this content is not right for you, we respect that completely. There is no obligation to stay, and we hope you find the stories that speak to your heart.